listening to the Betmaker Show. This is the NFL Draft Odds Analysis and Preview for Friday, April 10th, 2020. And now, live from Las Vegas, the host of the Betmaker Show, Brian Blessing.
Always fun to convene with our pal Bruce Marshall from the Gold Sheet. I'm Brian Blessing. We're in Las Vegas, and we're talking the NFL. And specifically, we are talking the NFL Draft as we get closer, Bruce, inside 2 weeks from a virtual reality show. I find it pretty comical. Everybody's making such a big deal about this. Well, these guys are, going to be doing it from home. It's like, well, I mean, for the most part, it's been a computer deal anyway. I guess the difference would be that the staffs may have a hard time convening that, a lot of it would be conference call stuff. I assume is the biggest difference is that maybe the entire, GM and scouting staff may not be in the same room. Could pose a hurdle, but I mean, they spent a whole year working on this. They kind of know where they stand. I don't think it's going to be that big a deal for them unless, and our producer Mike would cringe when he hears this, they have IT problems.
Yes, that's I think the worry right now. But like you said, Brian, the only real difference from the drafts that we've been seeing for the past several years is just having that big venue, and the teams usually just had one rep at the venue who would execute what the teams wanted to do back from their own headquarters. It wasn't like the old days where everybody, whoever was involved in the draft was there at the team table in New York back in the 70s or so. I mean, it's all being done at their headquarters anyway. And if you watch recent drafts, I mean, so much of it is done remotely anywhere. They're out there. They've got cameras at each of the team's headquarters and things like that. So, people are working remotely anyway on this stuff. So it really the only difference is that one big venue, which is actually is cumbersome anyway. And it became such a, block party, which has been in recent years. And it would have been this year in Las Vegas. And that's fun and all that. But as far as the mechanics of the actual draft, I don't think it's going to change much at all.
No, honestly, this situation... And Bruce has his picks for the first round up at the Gold Sheet, where Bruce does a great job, and we dive into the draft. We get closer and closer and closer, and more things are going to start to develop. And the Tua is the X factor in this draft, just because of the situation that everything's being done from afar. This is a guy. If you're going to be making, someone's going to take him that high. Or someone's going to give up the farm to trade up to get the guy. Virtual physicals, Bruce? Now, that's a gray area to me, bud.
Yeah. Now, he's had more, I'm surprised that they've talked so much about Tua that Trump's going to have a Tua update in his daily coronavirus update because there's so much talk about him and these teams haven't been able to do in-person of physicals with a lot of these guys. But the recent news on Tua, he just had a long taped workout that he sent to all the teams. His surgeons have said he'll be healthy for camp. They've been going over this hip injury, which is pretty serious. Anything with the hip is serious. From what I've read about it and what they've been talking about is it's not as bad as what Bo Jackson had, which really ruined his career and killed his hip really. When he had to actually have it replaced at some point, Tua didn't have that sort of severity apparently in his injury because they from what I understand is they put the hip relocated it after it dislocated so soon after, and then necrosis didn't have a chance to start. And also, whatever. I mean, it's good speculation though for everybody where he's going to go, and the fact these teams haven't been able to do the physicals like they normally would have done. They're going to have to trust the surgeons, trust Nick Saban, guys who have seen him. Saban apparently has given him the thumbs up for what that's worth. He's not a surgeon, but he is his coach, and he's talked to all the guys who operated on him. The doctors who have operated on him said he's going to be fine. But there's a lot of people say they're not so sure. And there's the other thing is, where was Tua anyway? How good really was he? Was he just a product of this Alabama system with all these NFL caliber receivers running wide open? Let's face it, a lot of Bama quarterbacks in recent years haven't really torn up in the NFL. However far you want to go back, McCarron before him, Jake Coker didn't even play in the NFL. It's a lot of the recent Alabama quarterbacks haven't made a big mark on the next level. So that's another question about Tua, that maybe he was a product of this great system. A lot of people still like him, though, so we'll see.
I think it becomes pretty intriguing to see where Herbert goes. And I think there could be, from betting markets, a head-to-head number. I just think the kid is so polarizing. And we see this every year, Bruce. Who's it going to be? We're 2 weeks away. I'm not saying it's Herbert, but that the week of the draft, all of a sudden there's a guy, and some guy is white hot, and he's climbing the ladder. And we're hearing rumblings that this one and that, the disinformation that's out there in the smoke screens where teams leak stuff about guys they're not even interested in. I think Tua's getting all the pub. Herbert's the interesting one, because if there are question marks about Tua, teams could be making the move to go up and get this guy.
Yes, and Herbert, I don't think goes last past the 6th pick, which is where the Chargers are at. So you've got, 3 teams at the moment, at least, who are drafting in the top 6 who look like they'd be in the market for a quarterback for sure. I mean, Cincy, Miami, and the Chargers. Now, trades can change some things. And there might be a team that wants one of these guys more than the other, assuming that Burrow stays at 1. Herbert is kind of polarizing, and you're right about there is often a guy who comes out of nowhere like that. Last year it was Daniel Jones. Jumped way up the ladder because the Giants liked him a lot more than anybody else. And that's all it takes is one team to really like a guy. Now, in Jones's case, he went from mid first round or even later in the 20s all the way up to 5, I believe, last year. I mean, Herbert's pretty much consensus top 10, top 6 pick even. I think I've always wondered about Herbert, how that he might be, a bit overrated, and you wonder if some of these other guys are going to jump up. Who's going to be that guy to jump up from somewhere? I mean, Jordan Love, I think, is well overrated, and he's one of these guys whose numbers really jumped up in Indianapolis at the combine there. But I mean, his performance last year didn't suggest as much. Some people still like Jacob Eason. I point out that last year, and I've done this before, and we've mentioned it. By mid-season last year, there were 3 rookie quarterbacks starting in the NFL. One was Daniel Jones, who knocked Eli out late September. But the two of the others, nobody was talking about on draft day. One was Gardner Minshew at Washington State, late-round pick with the Jags. He was starting by mid-season. Nobody was talking about him on draft day. And 2 was Duck Hodges from the Steelers out of Samford, a free agent. Now, circumstances put him in the lineup because of injuries in Pittsburgh, but nobody talked about him at all. He still had to make the team in the summer. So that's what we're saying is in the fall, this could look a lot different who's actually playing, and it could be guys that nobody's talking about here on draft day.
When you're sitting here trying to plot a course and numbers are up for position players taken in the first round, guys from conferences, quarterbacks, things of that nature. I think the one thing you have to do when you're going through this is you got to look at who's got the equity, who's got the draft capital. And you've got the Raiders with 2 first-rounders. You've got Minnesota with 2 first-rounders. And, of course, the Dolphins have 3. And the Dolphins were actually pretty active in free agency. And if they're sitting at 5, now they could use those, go up and guarantee they get the guy they want. Or they can sit there and one of the quality quarterbacks falls to them. Or maybe there's a plan B. But I mean, Miami can basically draft the future here. I mean, the Army and the bevy of picks, those are the teams you got to really watch. They can just say, hey, we're going to take 2 great players, or they can use that equity and do a lot more with it.
Yeah, they can, Brian. And Miami, like you said, has 3 first-rounders, 14 overall. they could certainly shift around. If there's some guy they've liked a lot, they have a little bit more flexibility, at least in this draft, to move picks around, to move up. But then we see that every year anyway. There's trades that, and that's the hardest thing, is to predict trades. And why I don't get into that too much, because you can't really predict them, except to know there's going to be a lot of them. So you just have to
one crazy pick.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, one just crazy pick of its own accord, or one move like the Bears made to go up and get Trubisky.
Yeah.
Even Daniel Jones last year. But I mean, one pick sends the whole thing a tizzy, where the one goofball thing, probably at bare minimum, I wonder, I'll let you put a number on it, but it's one crazy pick probably would impact over under 3.5 teams taking a guy they didn't think would be there.
Yeah, it does. And it's a domino effect, because that gets position groups sometimes change a lot, because of there could be a run on, linebackers or cornerbacks or whatever. But you can't really do that. What you really have to do, if you're going to bet this stuff, and you're going to be projecting, how many positions get picked in the first round and from what conferences, you've really got to scope out the first round. You got to come up with your own thing. Just come up who you think the draft is going to include in the first round, and then make a list, and then kind of figure out where you're going to go from there. Or else these numbers can really go nuts. So either make one up yourself, or look at somebody who's done one, and then you sort of count things up and then make a few adjustments like that. But at some point you got to scope out the first round and decide and make projections on who's going to get picked, and then you can start to figure out some of the other things from there.
And I'll just throw a scenario out there, and it could be them, it could be a dozen other teams. But this is, quote unquote, the year of the wide receiver, where there's projected numbers over under 6.5 potentially wide receivers taken in the first round. And for argument's sake, and in your mock draft, you've got the Raiders. You're saying they're looking at CeeDee Lamb from Oklahoma forever and a day. The Judy kid from Alabama has been tied to the Raiders. But if you sit and look at segments of the draft, if you looked at 12 in the first round as the point of demarcation for the wide receivers, and then a run could go, and the Raiders are, say, quote unquote, sitting there with the pick of the litter, I just throw it out there. Like, for example, Minnesota has 2 picks. Now, they just traded Stephon Diggs, so they've lost their, quote unquote, we'll call it, number 1 wide receiver. But Minnesota could parlay their 2 picks, 22 and 25, and add a second rounder or whatever, the formula says it's got to call for. But if 12 is the point of demarcation where a wide receiver is going, I mean, something nuts could happen where, maybe the Jets are at 11. Minnesota calls the Jets and said, we want to go up ahead of the Raiders. We want to be able to pick the wide out for sure. We want, and honestly, it could even go into the top 10. And that's just one position.
Sure, absolutely, Brian. Or it could go the other way. Teams could trade out of the first round thinking,
there's so many good ones.
There's going to be some good ones by the second round. We'll get our guy in the second round, and they may trade back and add some more picks. So yeah, that goes into it. It seems like this is a pretty good receivers, offensive tackles seem to be in abundance here. It's a good cornerback draft, I think. So there's several position groups that seem a little bit better stocked than others. So yeah, that could certainly happen. In the receiver group, I think I had 6 in the first round, which seems about, that's on course for this, 6 first round, 12 the first 2 rounds. That seems about right. But it looks like any team that is looking for wide receiver help, you'll be able to find a guy in the first 2 rounds.
Well, and then the crazy thing is, let's say even at the bottom portion of the first round, once a player is taken, if it's CeeDee Lamb or it's Judy, or if someone trades up to get one of those guys, it could prompt another trade from somewhere else. Once the run begins, then someone from someone way back in the pack in the second round says, we got to get in now. And the one trade could lead to 2 more trades. Yeah,
it could, especially if teams have their eye on 1 or 2 guys in particular, and they really want one specific one, even though there could be all these receivers, like we say, but they're one of these teams might really love a guy, and so they'll want to make sure they get him. But when you've got a position group that is so loaded, like the receivers seem to be this year, that lends itself to a lot of maneuvering by some of these teams, because many teams probably view most of these guys, pretty interchangeable there, and they'll be glad to get one of them. And but all it's going to take is one or two teams that value one over the other, and that could really start the dominoes falling a little bit earlier than normal.
I don't know that I've seen this. You tell me if you have, but I would tell you this. You better have a guy that's trading the market that really knows what the hell he's doing. But boy, I could envision, with all the numbers that are out there, I would think how massive the handle would be, because there's what is the first round, Bruce? Is it 10 minutes between picks? I think it's 10. Is it down to 10?
I think they reduce it to 10, yeah.
10 minutes between picks. And then if there's a trade, so whatever, say that there's a trade with the Lions at 3. The Lions use their 10 minutes. Then there's a trade. The team that moves up uses their 10. There can be some downtime and time to react. How incredibly massive could in-play live wagering be on this draft? And then all these numbers would change when a trade happened. I think the market would be through the roof. I mean, the books maybe really run a risk of getting sided and pummeled on this, but boy, oh boy, I just think of the potential for that betting market. It would be nuts. And I don't know that anybody does that.
Yeah, it would seem like it could go nuts with that sort of stuff, because things change on the fly really quickly, and there's this time limit, and some of these teams jump in there. Not all the teams use up their whole 10 minutes either. They come right in there and they just, boom, they're right off. After a minute, they've got their pick and they announce it. So, yeah, I mean, that could really, that changes things around a lot, especially when trades are made too. And that's the other thing you see. Oftentimes the trades happen in the first round for one guy that a team likes a lot. And when the trade is made, you can tell that's what they're going to do with the next pick. So I remember back in the 2006 draft, and that was the year Leinart and Vince Young and Cutler came out. And when Denver made the trade in the first round, at that point, you knew after Leinart and Young had gone that they were going to go get Cutler. So, yeah, that happens a lot too, but it happens quick. So it does make the books are going to have to move quickly if they're doing it.
For outstanding information and special offerings and promotions, we invite you and encourage you to sign up for our newsletter today simply by going to the website at betmaker.com. When you were putting your mock draft together, and that's the fun of this, and there are a lot that you would think are easy, but again, one thing can upset the whole apple cart. Basically, it's positions, where you guys that are, certain players are attached to certain guys all the time. Like I see, like the Eagles, without doubt, they've been talked about as taking a wide receiver. And I think he's one of the polarizing guys in the draft, the Shenault kid from Colorado, who you have going to the Eagles with offseason injury concerns. He's a guy, honest to God, that I think has that ability to go right where you've got him. But he's a guy that literally could just fall into somebody's lap. And how far down he falls, it's a really good one. Put it this way: a wide receiver is going to fall deep in this draft. That's going to be the position where some guy really fell, and then you got the guy, for the next decade. He's got a chip on his shoulder, and that guy maybe ends up playing better than the first one taken.
Oh, sure, yeah, that happens. That happens all the time, and a lot of times in positions. You see teams drafting the best athlete available. You hear that best player available. And that happens often at the draft, and it doesn't figure to fit a need as much. The need thing usually comes more in free agency, and that's when these teams can really address some specific needs a bit more, and they seem to generally is in the free agent market. When there is a need that they haven't addressed in the free agent market, that's when I think a position becomes more predictable in the draft here. And a team like the Eagles that wasn't able to do is the upgrades they wanted at the receiver spot, then I think, fairly safe as you can be in predicting this stuff, that they will probably go receiver in first round. Denver's another team like that. As for Shenault, who knows? I mean, that's a personal preference of mine. I thought this guy, in a situation where he didn't have the team around him that some of the guys like the Alabama receivers, Ruggs and Judy and some of the others had, he was a dominant player, and really when he was well was something to behold there. And not just catching the ball, but running after the catch, running people over, what they could do with him on jet sweeps. He was a marvelous player. I thought in 2018, he was really, in 2 seasons ago, first half of the year, he had a case for the Heisman that year until he's got slowed with the ankle injury 2 years ago. Then he got hurt again some last year. But he's a game changer when he's right. So he's one of these guys they're going to have to look at the medical reports and see. But I happen to think he can do more than a lot of these receivers in the draft.
Could we see something we never, ever see in this draft? Bill Belichick and the Patriots have gamed this system better than anyone. They always land compensatory picks. It's ridiculous. They get 2 extra thirds compensatory and 2 extra sixths projected compensatory picks. Could they? He always trades down. He's always done that. And I'm wondering, Brady's gone. And the willingness for people to, if something big splash city, I know it's easy for people they're just writing the Patriots off with Brady out of there. That being said, if someone says, hey, if they want to make a splash and to move up, and they involve maybe a first rounder next year, where people say, well, they're not going to be that great next year. That one is a lot more valuable than what would normally be a one when you're dealing with the Patriots, whether that's right or wrong. But with all these picks, could we see Belichick just target, the guy for life post Brady? They've got the bullets, Bruce. Could the Patriots make the blockbuster move that they never, ever considered making in the past because they didn't have to?
Yes, I think they could. And they're one of the teams that we've heard rumors that might do something, though Belichick, it's like the CIA trying to get information out of him. But there are some people who have said that, back to Tua, that he's close with Saban. He's worked with him in the past before, and they're good friends, and that Saban's given the thumbs up to Tua, and Belichick might go that way. I think there's another move coming from the Patriots at quarterback. There has to be. First of all, they've released Cody Kessler recently here, so there's only 2 on the roster right now. Stidham, of course, we talked about him before, the second-year man, Auburn, Baylor, and Brian Hoyer. So they're going to have to go out and get somebody else. He might. He does have the capital to move up. If he loves one of these quarterbacks, maybe it's Herbert. Maybe it's Tua, and he could trade. He could trade up, and he does have all those compensatory picks to help out. I also think there could be another move coming outside of the draft for him at quarterback. Remember, right at the start of free agency, we were talking about Andy Dalton, who hadn't quite hit the market yet. We thought the Bengals were going to do with Dalton what the Panthers did with Cam, is release him and put him out on the market. The Bengals still have Dalton on roster. He's got 1 more year on his contract. The thought is they've been trying to trade him. They just haven't yet. And if they haven't by the draft, they will release him after the draft. So there's a chance that Dalton could still end up somewhere, and it could be New England. It's just he hasn't been released yet the way the Panthers released Cam. Doesn't mean he's not going to move somewhere or won't be released after the draft and could still land somewhere. So I'd still keep an eye on that as a possibility there for the Patriots too.
Well, but I'm telling you, I'm dumb, but I ain't stupid. But I just can't get away from the Bengals. We know what they're going to do. We're pretty convinced what they're going to do. The Redskins, they drafted Haskins last year. They could get blown away, but I think they're in love with Young. Bruce, I just can't get away from the 3-hole here with Detroit. There are, so many issues with this team. They've got Stafford if they can keep him upright. They were good the first third of last year. I don't think there is desperate as the third overall pick would lead you to believe. I think last year was kind of draw a line through it for a lot of reasons. But a cornerback is not like completely going to change the fortunes of this team. And I can't sit but look at the three hole. And for argument's sake, Patricia, Belichick, I'm just saying, if they got an offer, I'll make it the Patriots. But if the Patriots swap ones, and all of a sudden, okay, you weren't getting a top 4 guy, but there's Detroit, and they got to go down to 23. But the Patriots give them 2 of those 3s. They have 3 third-round picks. If they gave them 2 thirds, they're 1 next year, and then the wild card, whatever. One more thing spices that up, and you've got Patricia and a Belichick relationship and blah, 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 blah. I just think Detroit's the kind of team that an army of picks helps them more than getting a great cornerback. Yeah. And I look at that spot, and I can't envision that isn't the one where we're sitting there to the last second where the phone is ringing off the hook.
Oh yeah, and I put it in my Detroit thing that Bob Quinn's going to get a lot of calls about this pick, and I think they're the most likely to trade out. And I think Miami is actually, if Miami really wants Tua and doesn't want to risk losing him, this is a spot Miami could jump up here into 3. And that they will have plenty of picks to tempt Detroit with, including just flipping first rounders 3 to 5, and then Miami's got a couple others that can flip in the first round too. So yeah, I think Detroit and the Giants at 4 are very, very likely to deal out and get multiples of picks because somebody's going to fall in love with one of these quarterbacks, I think, and not want to risk losing him. Miami is a real possibility here. Just because
this is the spot. This is the spot, Bruce, where the disinformation stuff is going to be off the charts. Where someone, this Team X has just expressed all this interest, and the phone's ringing off the hook, and then somebody panics, and they're sitting there laughing, going, "We weren't doing that. We weren't even considering doing that." And they made a move, gave up a fortune to make the move, and the team that started it all gets the guy they always wanted.
Well, it's also why when I do my thing here, and I'm doing it here in earlier April, I never forecast trades other than saying they'll happen, but I can't predict them. I'm looking at some mock drafts up on the web on certain sites, and they have predicted the trades and then making the pick based upon the trades they predict. And that's just, if you want to do that, fine, but then you're getting into the realm. You're into the realm of the unknown picking, projecting who's going to be picked beyond the first couple of picks anyway. But to throw trades into the mix and predict where trades are going to go, I just know they're going to happen. But for this, at this moment, I'll just lay it out as it looks like today, and then we'll just let the trades fall where they may.
All right, and then there was a piece of news. The Texans, Bill O'Brien running this show, just has. I don't know. I'll let you try to evaluate whether these are good moves. All the picks and equity they gave up last year, but now the move comes where they get. You could attach these 2 at the hip to me. They get Brandon Cooks for a 4th and a 2nd round pick. So okay, they replace Hopkins with a flashy, fast, smallish wide receiver. I mean, tons of speed with Cooks on one side, Fuller on the other. So you sit there and say, okay, man, what are the Texans doing? But the other side of the coin, you sit there and go, what's going on with the Rams?
Oh yeah, the Rams. Listen, Les Snead has made some real. Now, from the Houston side, you think are they any better off than they were when they started this thing, when they still had Hopkins on board? No, it doesn't. Looks like they're spinning their wheels. The Rams are an intriguing situation. One, they still don't have a 1st round pick. They don't have one next year either. They have been dealing a lot of picks away in recent years. This year's the Jalen Ramsey trade with the Jags and Les Snead, the GM, it was really a win now sort of thing. I mean, he had been dealing future draft picks away almost the way George Allen used to do it. And the Rams are really in this sort of win now mode. And the way they had structured this contracts and some of the extensions they gave guys like Cooks and even Todd Gurley, and both of them are gone now. And you have to wonder what's Leslie doing here, in structuring these contracts and all. It's interesting how, it wasn't long ago, the Rams seemed to be the model franchise for the whole league, and all these teams signing, coaches who had worked for McVay and all that. And all of a sudden, this thing looks like it might not be going so well. I personally think they have paid too much money for Goff. I don't at all think he's an elite quarterback yet, and they're paying him like one. And they paid him a little sooner than they had to. So there's another question of what Les needs doing contract wise. Their star is sort of heading down right now, I think, and it's interesting. The NFC West, very intriguing, where the Niners are at. The Seahawks are still 4-1, and the Cardinals look like they've made some real upgrades down there. So where are the Rams in this mix? I don't know.
Well, okay, we could go on all day, and we'll do it again next week as we're getting ever closer. But I would just throw this out because I'm guilty of it. I won't. You're answering what I'm asking you. But the polarizing stuff. What do? What have we sat here and done? We have talked about the skill positions, the sexy picks, and anything that happens in that top 5, 6, and the wild things that we're sitting here conceivably that could happen. Football teams are built by drafting monsters, and games are won in the trenches. We know they are. That there are quality tackles that are out there, and those are, believe me, the building blocks for a decade. If you get the right left tackle, that all of a sudden, watch the run on linemen, Bruce, which, again, they're not the sexy picks. But if something happens in the quarterback fray up top, and then all of a sudden somebody panics and, oh, God, here we go with the wide receiver run, incredible offensive linemen and defensive linemen are going to drop in this draft. And those are going to be the difference makers.
Yeah, well, I've got 5 offensive tackles in my first 18 projections. So I think the other new buzz thing are edge rushers on defense, guys who can come and collapse a pocket from the edge. And, this is Chase Young. I mean, the Jadeveon Clowney mold, and who, by the way, is still out there in the market. But, it's those guys. And you're going to see if there's an edge rusher with a lot of promise, they're going to be in there too. So those are a couple of the groups, the tackles, the edge rushers. These are the guys now who can really. Well,
isn't it funny? But I'm telling you, and you and I just did a thing on my radio show with our fond AFL memories, and we remember all that. And that was an aerial league. But this draft, it's funny. It just so much mirrors the style of plays, and I'm sure you could add to this. But I think, like, in terms of eras, where the dominant edge rusher, terror on the edge was the guy years ago. Then it went, I'm like, wait a minute, the way the game had gone, there was a long stretch where I'm like, you know what, the guy, the difference maker positionally were the defensive tackles, the space eaters that literally an Albert Hainsworth, a Vince Wilfork. There were guys like that could just destroy the middle. The Packers, I forget what was the tackle's name the Packers had. He was a monster. But that for a while, that was literally, you get the great defensive tackle, and he is destroying a running game, right? They had a triple team. That was the hot thing. And now it's an aerial game. So it's DBs and edge rushers again on the defensive side of the ball, because it's all incumbent on what the style of the game is.
And the one position group that has really been hit in recent years are the running backs. You don't see them. A lot of teams just play one of them now. And
chance not one goes in this first round.
Yeah, we've seen it before. And I only had one late in the first round. I had DeAndre Swift out of Georgia. By the way, Georgia's had a lot of good running backs going to the NFL. So that's why I put him a little bit above Dobbins. But he was the only one I did. But you're right. It wouldn't be a surprise if no runner goes. And that's the one position group in particular. It's not been put out of existence yet. That's why I was sort of glad to see Derrick Henry start to take games over last year, because you saw the runners. You saw what a big-time running game could do. But there's not as many of them even on the field now. There's a lot of teams just go with one back, and that's a position group that has been devalued the way the game has changed. And it's interesting. There used to be years, the year of the runner, and there'd be all these guys picked, running backs galore in the first round. That ain't the case lately, and it's not going to be the case again in a couple weeks.
All right. Great stuff, Bruce. It's always fun just chatting sports with you. And this is stuff we can bet on. And I think a very fluid market. We'll know a lot more and can ultimately pull the trigger on this stuff. Because, listen, you made a great mock draft. It's gorgeous. But you know and I know, by the time we get to next week, there could already be a trade or you get a little bit of buzz. And all of a sudden, the whole thing goes to hell in a handbasket.
I think the best I ever did in one of these, I got 8 picks right, and I felt like I just won the lottery. So that's I mean, things change a lot. But as of, whatever day it is, if it's April 10th or whatever, it's a good read April 10th. But once the draft is over, all the pre-draft stuff doesn't matter. So it's very fluid.
Always great information from Bruce Marshall. I'm Brian Blessing. We're in Las Vegas, and we can't wait for the NFL draft.
Let's make some money tonight.
Well, that's the Betmaker Show for now. We publish multiple times each week. We'd like to thank you for listening, and if you liked what you heard, please take a moment to leave a rating and review, or subscribe to our show feed, or share our show with a friend or two and help us grow the show. We very much appreciate it. Visit us on the web at betmaker.com, and reminder to sign up for the newsletter. Thanks to our engineer, Darren Vandermolen, and producer, Mike Gallivan. The Betmaker Show is a production of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated. Betmaker is a registered trademark. Any rebroadcast, reproduction, or other use of this content without the express written consent of Cardinal Marketing Incorporated is strictly prohibited.
The handicapping and sports odds information contained on this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Please confirm the wagering regulations in your jurisdiction, as they vary from state to state, province to province, and country to country. Using this information to contravene any law or statute is prohibited. The podcast is not associated with, nor is it endorsed by any professional or collegiate league, association, or team. This podcast does not target and is not intended for an audience under the age of 18. If you think that you have a gambling addiction, stop this podcast now and please seek help.
Gambling and betting on sports is a form of entertainment and should be about having a good time. But when done excessively, it may negatively affect other areas of a person's life, such as their physical and mental health, school or work performance, finances, and or interpersonal relationships. At Betmaker.com and The Betmaker Show, we're concerned about the addiction that gambling may cause, and for this reason, we encourage everyone to practice responsible gambling. An approach to gambling that helps you ensure that it remains an enjoyable activity. Here are the main principles of responsible gambling. Don't think of gambling as a way to make money. Always gamble with money that you can afford to lose. Set limits and stick to them. Never chase losses. Don't gamble when you're depressed or upset, and create a healthy balance. Always be aware of how much time you spend gambling or thinking about gambling. And do not allow gambling to cause you to miss out on time with family and friends or time spent on other activities you enjoy. By following these guidelines, gambling can be a good time and great entertainment. If you feel at any time that your gambling is taking away from important areas of your life, is causing you stress or depression, or is leading to financial losses that are beyond your control, please reach out for help. Learn more at responsiblegambling.org.